Hello everyone, and welcome to Sergey Gorshkov. Appropriate for the year of leadership. He is appropriate for the year of leadership. It's always fun when you bring in Russia's, well, the Soviet Union's one of the most decorated naval officer. It is always fun. Hello. Now, what you all don't realise is that the poodle just has already jumped into my lap already. From being asleep, he has jumped already into my lap. Now that again. We are live, so you believe you deserve poodle treats. He does believe he deserves poodle treats. This shirt is weird. I think it's shrunk. Because the weird thing is, I'm losing weight and this shirt has managed to make it look like I actually have things which I don't. Hello everyone, how are we all doing? Michael, do not give Zebedee ideas. He has enough as it is. How do I put this politely? Zebedee is a corgi. Zebedee, as far as he's concerned, is on a seafood diet, not a diet. It's the way it is. Oh, yes, you can't mess with tradition. I'm glad. I'm glad that Runon's on the way to get their lunch. I'm glad everyone's happy in here. Welcome to Sergey Gorshkov. I did not expect this to be a particularly popular video for some reason, I have to admit. It's always the fun thing when you start going into some of the Russian and other things. You don't necessarily get people turn up in droves. But I think it's worthwhile looking at them. And this one's going to be an interesting video because we're going to look at his career and his progress. So how he evolves, how he gets to where he gets, what he does when he's there, prior to the Shameless Book Plug. After the Shameless Book Plug, we're going to look at, we're basically going to dissect leadership and some of the strategy from his book, The Sea Power of the State. So yeah, that's our plan today. A good mixture of history of the person and the book of the person. Hello. We also have some fun coming up. We do really have some fun coming up. You might have noticed the video is scheduled for, I think it's the 7th of August. Hello. Yes. Remember, you have to behave because you're supposed to be resting. If you get too excited, you have to go. If you get too excited, you have to go because you're supposed to be resting. No. I have to be strict on this because it's for your health. And I will be strict for your health. Yes, you are cute. No. I'm not. There's a reason you're put with me. I am the one who will go no. If it's for your health. No. Anyway. You might have noticed that the 7th of August has changed to an interesting title. Procurement for Peace. Second draft. Procurement for Peace first draft. The video where I recorded my first sort of attempts at doing this sort of presentation is already loaded, and it's loaded for November. And it's loaded because it's going to go live in the beginning of November, and hopefully by then it's going to have a ticket link on it. And the ticket link is going to allow you to get tickets, should you be interested, hopefully in coming to London, to the Lawton Chair of Lawton Naval History Series. Now, there is an online system, so you can watch it online, the presentations. I think it works live. But I'd also like to have a lot of people there, because it's going to be a kind of fun one. It's going to be November the 13th, which means it's going to be the first day after Remembrance Day, and before Remembrance Sunday. I think. I'm not sure they're doing Remembrance Sunday the Sunday beforehand or the Sunday after that week. Possibly they're doing it before. Sometimes they do the Remembrance Sunday before, but I haven't checked that one specifically out. But it's the Armistice Day is the 11th of November. And so around that time, the Naval History event is kind of a special one. And it looks like I'm getting that one so far as that's what it's been. A date's been given to me so far. And I am going to be putting forward, some would call it a paper, some would call it a strong argument, some would call it a thesis, some might even call it a theory, but it is not a theory, it is very much a historian's analysis of the challenges of procurement and why we're getting procurement wrong. What the problems are with procurement. And it was rather interesting because I was recording that at the same time I was recording this. And it was kind of interesting when I was looking in here going, all these theorists, Gorshkov, Mahan, Cable, Corbett, even that often kind of forgotten theorist, Teddy Roosevelt. All right about it. All have it in there. But it's not really remembered about what they're saying and what I'm going to be talking about. Because, realistically, the only theorist of that set who had a major say in an ability to procure for it, and under it, was this guy. Sergey Gorshkov. Why? Why? Because the procurement for peace is about numbers of ships you procure and why you procure them for conflict management and managing peacetime, not just war fighting. And the fact is, you need to think about both when you're procuring. Anyway, that's all coming up. So there's going to be a live, which is the second draft. There's a recorded video, which is the first draft. And there'll be a presentation, which is hopefully the final draft. And that one, I said, will also be the first in-person public lecture I'll have given in the UK, as an in-person public one, almost since COVID. There've been a couple since then. There's been one, which might have been King's as well. There's been a couple of conferences, but they've all been quite small affairs in some regards. This is going to definitely be the biggest. I think it might be the only one since COVID, actually. I think the others might be just before COVID. It's going to be interesting. So if you want to see me lecture in person, it'll be there. You're not being practiced on yet. You're going to be, but not yet. So it'll be fun. And as said, tickets are free, but you do have to book to come. And usually afterwards, there's a dinner at the nearby pizzeria where everyone who wants to is invited to come along to. And it can take there's no limit on number of people that can come. If they want to come, more the merrier. So, with that being said, it hasn't been posted yet. The link will be on the first draft video and various other things. Basically, I have to wait for them to post it. And we'll sort all the details out then. But it should be a lot of fun. So, with that being said, Sergey Gorshkov. The third and the last Admiral of the Fleet of the Soviet Union. Now that's a pretty big rank, having that. That's a very big rank. You are definitely not calming down. You need to calm down. It means that functionally he is the most senior officer in the Soviet Navy and one of the most senior officers in the Soviet Armed Forces. And you have to also remember he is Commander-in-Chief of the Soviet Navy from 1956 till 1985. Now, one of the things I will say is this. Be wary of old men in professions when people die young. Be wary of men who survive in positions of power in an organization which has a habit of having a high turnover rate. When you consider the sheer number of leaders of the Soviet Union he continues his position through, it is a very unwise counsel who writes off his power and capabilities. In fact, sometimes when I read various books which go, oh, he didn't really have much power and influence in this organization or that organization, I sit there and look at it and think, well, unfortunately, the answer to that is he was involved in the appointment of the person to run that organization, the appointment of people underneath them, the appointment of people who predecessed them, and the appointment of people who succeed them. He's still there. That gives him an awful lot of power. We are talking about a man who didn't just know where the bodies were buried, he'd buried them and the people who'd gone looking for them several times over. This man is without a doubt one of the most ruthless political operators the world has ever seen running a navy. Again, I point to his survival. He's also very strict in his ambitions, which speaks of a level of self-control which is frankly amazing in the scenario he's in. That's his trick. He wants to run the Navy. He doesn't want anything else. And he fights for that small position and keeps that position and runs that position well. He runs it well. And the interesting thing is, he's also one of the few officers in the Soviet armed forces who really did also earn all those medals. He got mentioned in dispatches so many times, or rather the equivalent of mentioned in dispatches so many times in World War II, or the Great Patriotic War as the Soviet Union knew it. His name actually got remembered by Stalin, because Stalin had signed his name that often. Think about that. Stalin, who was who was involved in the writing and had people writing these names out mostly for him, doing the notes and things of the mentioning dispatches and all other equivalents of that. But a name came through so often from the Navy because he was doing so many things, he got remembered. He basically was the pioneer of Soviet amphibious warfare doctrine. He is the person who carries out all the landings. If you look at the modern Russian Navy, this man would be spinning in his grave if he saw it and the way it's been handled. He was an incredibly capable commander. And he had a clear doctrine of what he was going to do. And do you know what? The Soviet Union thought this document was scary enough to have it published in English at the height of the Cold War. This book is first published in 1976 in by Woenstat, the Russians, Soviet publishers. It was published in 1979 by the Pergamon Press and reprinted in 1980. This book. And trust me, it is worth reading. No, it is not Corvette or Mahan. It is very much a Soviet take on sea power, but it has some interesting things in there. And the trick is to read between the lines of some of the propaganda that's woven in there, especially because he probably has assistants who help him write it from the Naval History section. But it is his philosophy, put out in as stark terms as possible to make sure that everyone understands that his view of naval warfare is total war. There is no half measures. There is no mucking around. There is no playing silly games. Everything is an asset to be used, and everything will be used. So, the question that Paul's asked is, was he seen as a threat to or by Stalin or his successors, or was he enough removed? Actually, worse. He was seen as a bastion of every single one of their regimes. He was seen as the strong point which held the Soviet Navy to its hard standards and kept them all in power. In other words, the man wasn't quite Warwick the Kingmaker, but by gum was he good at playing the game. By gum. So this is my point. People like to go, well, actually, decisions were made by committees. Yes, committees staffed by people selected by him. I have to remember, I must be forgetting that one. The politician who picks the people who crew a committee. Yes, it's the committee who make the decision. I didn't select that committee and put a staff it knowing exactly what they were going to decide, did I? No, Walter Brothers, Russian sea power for dummies would have been too on the nose. The sea power of the state was suitable for the communists, because who else would be exercising sea power? There are some very interesting NATO reports on this man. Very interesting NATO reports on this man. Some of them have even been published. And the published ones basically run the gamut of, he is old, so therefore he must be just a figurehead, to he's dangerously in charge. And usually they put him as being old, just about the time at which, just before a deputy or so-and-so who they think is going to move up to replace him, suddenly finds their career has finished. Oh, sorry. You are the weakest link, goodbye. And then the next report, after the new deputy's been appointed and he's still in post, he crackles with power. It goes through such a frigging loop, it is disturbing. His demise is predicted about a dozen times between 56 and 85. Every single one. When he does retire in 85, they think, oh yes, he's been marshalled off to the inspectorate. That's great. That means he's lost power. He then spends the next 3 years till he actually dies actually being an inspector. And we'll be getting into that because the man does some things in the Soviet Union which frankly you're not supposed to do in the Soviet Union. Like actually hold people to account. He's known to turn up and question factories as to whether what they said they were producing, they were actually producing in volume and quantity. The man was scary. They tried all sorts of things to stop him doing it. They found he could outdrink them all. And he could out-argue them all. And he could out-politic them all. And the fact that he didn't go for leadership of the Soviet Union shows just how smart he actually was. Because, frankly, he knows that anyone who gets up there, it's a poison chalice. Whereas the level he was perfectly positioned to stay in power and have a lovely life. Agreed, Molly. If you have not read Gorshkov's books, please rectify this at your earliest convenience. It's well worth the time. It's a very interesting read. It's also quite a scary read to read at when you sit there and go, so all those people who keep being surprised by revelations of what China is doing today, or India's occasional naval policy, and when people look at it and go, this is a surprise, this is a revelation, this is something no one was expecting, go read Gorshkov. Literally, go read Gorshkov. He survived until Gorbachev, yes. He, let's put it this way. He survived more of the Soviet Union than most of the leaders of the Soviet Union. Let's put it this way. As head of the Navy, he was in post from 56 onwards. Now, his career had grown up under Stalin. To be honest, he'd grown up under Lenin, but we'll leave that to one side. He manages to survive. Well, he survives what happens to Malenkov, but he's appointed in position by Khrushchev in 56. He survives Brezhnev. He survives Andropov. He survives Chemenko. And he is well into the career of Gorbachev. Gorbachev actually specifically doesn't want him to go, it seems like. Because he was a bulwark against the hardliners. Because, believe it or not, this man was not a hardliner. He was a pragmatist in so many ways. So many scary ways. That's possibly one of the reasons why he survived as long as he was. He was never a hardliner for anyone. He was a pragmatist for it all. And that's why he survived. He is a very, very capable politician. And a pretty capable naval officer. And I'd like you to think again about that rank, Admiral of the Fleet of the Soviet Union. Because there are three who hold that position. Ivan Isakov, who was promoted in March 1955, and, well, how do I put this politely? He held the rank and continued to live with the rank, but he was moved to the Academy of Sciences. And he died in 1967. Nikolai Kuznetsov. He's promoted to rank in March 1955. He retires in February 1956. He was literally promoted to that rank, retired, and after being replaced by Gorshkov in position. Sergey Gorshkov is appointed to the rank in 1967. Immediately, everyone thought he would retire in 1968. He carries on serving till December 1985, and then continues to use the rank when he's part of the Inspectorate. They don't promote another after him. 11 years, the Soviet Union don't have an Admiral of the Fleet of the Soviet Union. Usually, it's a rank given to someone to get rid of them. It doesn't get rid of Gorshkov. It emboldens him. It empowers him. Yes, his ways are not necessarily our ways. But the thing is, he works in the Soviet Union and the Soviet system, and he survives. And one of the reasons he survives is he's very good at both avoiding taking the credit or the blame for things. Take too much credit, you become a threat. Take too much blame, you become expendable. The trick is to make sure there are others to take the credit and others to take the blame. And you keep going. Which is one of the reasons why you have to be quite so careful when you're analysing his position. But if you've ever worked in certain organisations, you will have spotted people like this. People in fairly senior, sometimes upper management, but never the highest management positions, who are indispensable to the running of the organisation, but who manage to avoid getting either the credit or the blame for anything. And they will continue in post for years, whilst other stars shine brighter, but ultimately get snuffed out. Yeah. He's an interesting soul. Anyway, let's consider his career and where it starts off, pre-World War II. He's born in Kamyats-Polotski, which is a city in western Ukraine on the Smych River. It's an interesting area. He was born to probably a Russian family. He grew up in Kolma, which of course is Moscow area, and joined the Soviet Navy in 1927. He's born in February 1910. So he joins at 17 years old. He entered the MV Frunze Naval School in Leningrad. And he enters it in 1927 and graduates in November 1931 to join the Black Sea Fleet as an officer aboard the destroyer Frunze. You might be noticing Frunze is appearing a lot. That's because the Soviet Union really does lack for names when it comes to naval things. It really does lack for names. And if we consider the destroyer, the Frunze, well, it was originally the Bistri, which was turned over to the UK Royal Navy in November 1918. They scuttled it in April 1919. It was raised in 1922 and was renamed the Frunze. And Frunze, of course, is Mikhail Frunze, who was a prominent Soviet revolutionary, politician, army officer, and military theorist, who died in 1925. Both he and his wife, well, no, just he died in 1925. I think he died in 1925. He was a capable officer, but he died from a chronic ulcer. It's an interesting point is that Frunz was possibly one of the few military officers who Stalin trusted. But there is also the scenario, that quite possibility, that Stalin ordered his death. However, there is a debate about this. But still, many things were named for Frunz because there weren't many other options. There were not many other options. Also, it would not be unusual for Stalin to order the death of friends who might be a threat to him in the future. No, he didn't have rapid onset lead poisoning. He got chloroform poisoning whilst undergoing an operation for his ulcer. Hi, Dread. Yes, it's an interesting one. But, the Soviets like to name all these things for the various, their very limited number of people. And so, Frunz it is. Now, the point about this is he gets his position as a watch officer in November 1931. Remember, he's been through a little over 4 years of schooling. He becomes the navigator of the Frunz in December 1931. And he, in March 1932, so he's been active in the Navy for like 5 months. He's transferred to Pacific Fleet to serve as navigator aboard the mine layer at Tomsk. If you're thinking this is rapid promotion going on, you have no idea how rapid it can get. The Soviet Navy isn't exactly flush with that many young officers, or with that many officers full stop, and not many that are complicated. Well, are competent. And he's an interesting officer. But he's getting promoted. He's capable. It's a rapid promotion. And it happens. Now, the thing is, once you add on to the lack of officers, you add on the fact he was mildly capable, and he's being promoted quite quickly, it makes sense. You also add on to the fact that the Soviet Navy is short of officers. He's promoted to become flagship navigator of the mine laying and mine sweeping force, brigade as they tend to call it at this point, roughly, of the fleet in January 1934. And in January 1934, he is promoted to command of the Ergen-class guard ship. In November 1934. He's promoted to the command of the Ergen-class guard ship Buran. Now, think about that for his promotion speed. He joins in 1927, starts training, and he is promoted rapidly up. Dread, I'm not sure what you're shouting about in the chat, but honestly, these promotions and ranks are fairly well known. They're fairly constant in all the books about him. So, I'm not sure how you're arguing they are wrong. Don't think you're either know who I'm talking about, or alternatively, you're just shouting in the chat because you're offering no evidence. You're just doing the shouting in the chat, and that's not really sensible behavior. Now, if we consider he's got command of a ship by November 1934, and again, we consider he was first made a watch officer in November 1931, after ending service in October 1927, entering training. He has, therefore, within 7 years, got command of a ship. Within 3 years of entering into service. And that's, again, how do I put this? Definitely fast track, but also it's a symptom of the system he's in. There is a constant churn of officers. There is a constant churn over officers and other scenarios going on here, and so that does help with your promotion. If there are officers being shot, officers being moved off to different commands, not enough officers around in the first place because of the effect of the revolutions, you have issues. You have to remember that Russia had gone through 2 revolutions, the Menshevik and then the Soviet Revolution. And getting a command of an Urgan-class guard ship is a pretty nice thing, again. It's not the largest vessel, it's basically the largest thing that the Soviets can produce themselves at this point. But again, there are worse ships out there. There really are worse ships. I say this with love in my heart, there are worse ships. It's not that bad, but it's also... You can tell which navy it's been produced by. You can tell it's come from, well, projects 2, 4, and 39 of the Soviet Navy, which nicknamed the Bad Weather Flotilla. There were 18 of these vessels built, and they were roughly 500 tons, 21 knots. They carried 2 4-inch guns in single mounts, some machine guns, and a triple torpedo tubes, but yeah, it's not that great. It's really not that great. Now, with all this experience he's already built up, they're a gun class of better than nothing. They're not great, but they're not bad either. They're what the Soviet Union can build at this point. I'd say more the problem is that they build 18 of them, but there again, they don't have enough officers to really crew the ships they have. This is one of the reasons why Gorshkov is getting the promotions he is. Because he's capable. And because... compared to his compatriots, definitely. And because he's there. And they basically have a system going whereby you get promoted up until you muck up. Now, after he'd been at that post for a while, in charge of the Buran, in December 1936, he finally gets courses for destroyer commanders, or that level of officer, between December 36 and March 37. And after he's done that, he gets the pretty new, the Raziecki, which was a Gavini-class destroyer. These were better ships. They were better vessels than the Uragan class. They were built mostly in the late 1930s. And the Raziecki herself is laid down in February 1936, either February 1936 or November 1936, launched in March 1938 and completed in December 1940. Now, the thing is, if we consider when he gets her in March 1937. So he's her commissioning officer. We would say. But please note, we would say this because there's a dispute as to when he commands her versus he takes on his next role. Because, you see, technically she's supposed to not be launched till March 1938 and not completed until December 1940. So, what is this? What's going on here? Well, pretty much he's her building officer, watching her. He is watching her construction. He's watching her getting it available. And then he goes off to fill off another role. That is Chief of Staff of the Pacific Fleet Destroyer Brigade in October 1937. He then is appointed its commander in May 1938. At which point he does go and take part in the Battle of Lake Khasan, which is an interesting one against the Japanese in August 1938. And then he's transferred to command the Black Sea Fleet Cruisers Brigade in June 1940. Now, are we stuck in this slide or no slides of the ships? Literally, there aren't many pictures of the ships going around. I could have put pictures of the ships on, but broadly speaking, we're on the slide longer than I was expected to do because we had the person in the chat who just kept going, "You are wrong," without giving explanation. I was sort of going, well, am I wrong about something? What am I wrong about? I don't know what. You're not giving me any information or details about it. There are some photos of the ships, but broadly speaking, this is more about his time and his service. And the fact is, he goes back, he very rarely gets much education or gets much time. He's getting a lot of condensed sea time, a lot of theoretical sea time, if the ships are available. Now, the interesting thing is that at the beginning of World War II, he is theoretically both responsible, and this is according to, and I would say the source, I shouldn't say the source, is the various books. Norman Polmar has some stuff about Admiral Gorshkov. His book published in 2019 there's a section on Admiral Gorshkov, the man who challenged the US Navy, which is a pretty interesting read. There's also some translation sections of Vacher Lur's book, Admirals and Generals of the Soviet Navy during the Great Patriotic and Soviet-Japanese Wars, 41 to 45. It was published in Russian, but there are some sources translating sections of it in English, including some about Gorshkov. There is a book out there called The Life and Work of Admiral of the Fleet, Soviet Union, S.G. Gorshkov, which has not been translated from Russian, but which I did manage to find some bits of it in various places which had been. So I used them as a reference, but I haven't really cited them because I'm not sure how legitimate those translations are. But anyway, we're having some fun. And he's certainly having some fun. Now, there's a debate as to whether he's given a cruiser brigade or a destroyer brigade. The reason I say this is technically he's supposed to be transferred to the cruiser brigade of the Black Sea. But when he starts World War II, we know he's in charge of a destroyer brigade. So it could have been one or the other. Honestly, it could have been both. They are kind of short officers, and the Black Sea Force is a bit under strength. Now, when the Germans do invade the Soviet Union, Gorshkov's straight into operations. In the 16th of September 1941, now I want you to remember, think about this, 16th of September 1941. Think about how long he's been in the Navy. He joined in 1927 at the age of 17. He's 41 years old. No, 31 years old, right, at this point? 31 years old. He has been serving aboard ships for 10 years, barring about 6 months off for training. He is promoted to Rear Admiral. He is 31 years old, and he is promoted to Rear Admiral. That's 7 years younger than Nelson. Think about that. Gorshkov makes a Rear Admiral at 31 years old. Not too bad. Then, during the Siege of Odessa, he leads an amphibious operation, which is a landing in the area of the Gorshkov, in the command of, and then takes command of the Azov flotilla in October of that year, 1941. Basically, this is I'm going to say this is a bit of law of natural selection going on, in that there aren't many to begin with. They're dying rather quickly. If they don't deliver, they tend to end up getting lead poisoning rapidly. If they do deliver, they get promoted rapidly. So this is what we are seeing with this officer. In August in January 1942, he commands the landings on the Kerch Peninsula. In August 1942, he's in charge of 150 warships, broadly speaking. We're going to call warships broadly speaking here. Some of them are converted barges. As a flotilla that break out from the Sea of Azov into the Black Sea after withdrawal to Novosibirsk. And so basically he breaks out through here from the Sea of Azov, past the Crimea into the Black Sea. I'm not sure what's going on with Twitch right now, but apparently it's gone offline. But I'm still live, so what's going on? Twitch just being Twitch. Yay. And, you know, it's not... There is a lack of options other than going around as well. Because, of course, they're out of the Azov. You know, the Azov flotilla is disbanded. And he becomes deputy commander of the naval forces and a member of the military council in the Russian Defense District. At one point, he actually gets command of what's called troops of the 47th Army, but pretty much all the active troops in the 47th Army defending the region during the Battle of the Caucasus. He's a naval officer who's good enough at his job that he's put in charge of the army. It's fun. It's a lot of fun going on. And then after he takes command, and then after that, after the Battle of Caucasus, he takes command of the reformed Azov flotilla in February 1943. He runs the landings at Tangarong, Mariupol, Osmenko, and the capture of the Taman Peninsula, as well as supporting the Northern Caucasian Front. During November 1943, in the Kerch-Etigan operation, he is completely responsible for operations, which is kind of a scary position to be in. And he is awarded the Order of Kuznetsov First Class, the Order of Ushkov Second Class, and various other medals. In fact, to point it out, he was mentioned 7 times in the personal orders of Joseph Stalin. Mentioned 7 times by name in the personal orders of Joseph Stalin. Yeah, I am starting to wonder whether I need to find something better than Restream. I will say that. I'm starting to want to find if I need to find something better than Restream. If anyone does see anyone else doing this dual streaming lark, and they do find there is some better software out there which does it, please tell me, because Restream costs me money each month. And it keeps playing me around a bit. Now, it could be the internet, but, you know, hopefully I get some money this month, and from, I don't know, Taxman or something, who knows, maybe I'll get some money and I'll be able to get the new router. No, it won't come from your Bicky fund, but you're not getting any more Bickies because it's good for you. Not good for you. It's not good for you. You're cute, though. Now, after this, the army actually asked for him, the army high commanders, people like Zhukov, etc., and Khrushchev, ask for him to actually be put in charge of something. They asked for him to be put in charge of the Danube flotilla, because they know Gorshkov will fight. And they want the Danube flotilla to be a fighting formation. And so he leads them in the Jassy-Kishinev offensive. And he heads up to the Dniester crossing and all the entries into the Danube Delta. He leads some of the operations into Belgrade and Budapest. And he's promoted, to Vice Admiral in September 1944, and was given in December that year, was given command of the Black Sea Fleet Squadron. He ended the war as pretty much commander of the Black Sea Fleet. There are theoretically people in charge of him, but he's in charge of all the stuff which actually works. So, he's starting to get an idea where he got all those medals for. He actually was doing his job and was actually pretty good at it. This is why his chest looks like a field of shrapnel. Because he took quite a lot of shrapnel and fired quite a lot of shrapnel. Sure, the fact Gorshkov had so many decorations adorning his uniform is testament to his longevity and survival skills. Yes, Moy Madison, definitely. He is an interesting case study in what can be accomplished by a person who's willing to contain his own ambition. He has ambition, don't get me wrong. He just does not obsess over it. What he has ambition for is his fleet. And he has a lot of ambition for that. Well, that's one of the reasons why I do as much riverine warfare on this channel as I do, because honestly I included in it. And this is a man who literally got his position through amphibious operations and riverine warfare. That's what he was fighting in. And Steve Clarke, you're quite right. In Death of Stalin, they toned down the number of in the movie. They toned down the number of medals Zhukov actually had, because again, it's kind of go and take a look at the generals and marshals in North Korea. Communist countries often are very happy, in most dictatorial regimes actually, and it doesn't matter if they're communist or fascist or whatever they are very happy awarding shiny bits of metal, because shiny bits of metal make up for a lot of things. In nicest way, and this is leading into a bit of a modern subject. Believe it or not, I usually say on this channel I have never been offered to do any advertising. I've never been offered a sponsored video. That's not quite true. I've been offered sponsored videos which will pay me in clout, apparently. True. In clout, apparently. They'll pay me in exposure because of the way the logarithm works. My view is, I want the money first. Right. I think it's gone and it's come back. What can I say? It's always fun, but yeah, I think there is an internet issue going on. I think there is something, because both YouTube and Twitch and the whole of Restream went down. In the nicest way, don't worry, I have the new router picked out, I have everything worked out. Yeah. But clout doesn't pay bills, Funko. It doesn't. But if you can't give someone really better pay, better quality of life, better other things, what can you give them? Medals to make them feel they're important. And that's what they do. Now, during the Cold War, he has an interesting career. He stays on commander of the squadron, that's the seagoing element of the Black Sea Fleet, until he becomes Chief of Staff in November 1948. So he happily sits in the Black Sea. He becomes commander of the fleet in August 1951. He's promoted to full admiral, in August 1953, and in July 1955 he's appointed first Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Soviet Navy, and then he's appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Soviet Navy in January 1956, succeeding Kuznetsov. Now, the thing is, that promotion level is fairly okay. It's fairly good. He was, in a nice way, it does give time for his age to catch up with his role. It does. You know, when he gets his rank of Admiral in 53, he is 43 years old. When he gets promoted to Admiral of the Fleet, please note this is not Admiral of the Fleet of the Soviet Union, but Admiral of the Fleet, 5-star Admiral, he's in April 62. And the thing is, as Commander-in-Chief of the Soviet Navy, he is also simultaneously Deputy Minister of Defense of the Soviet Union. Deputy Minister of Defense for the Soviet Union. Under Brezhnev, he is in charge of the build-up of warships and submarine forces, and he continues to be in charge of that role. Gorshkov is who sends out the ships on their long cruises. He forms squadrons in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the Pacific, and Indian Oceans. He is the person who builds the Blue Water Navy. In 1965, he's made a hero of the Soviet Union and is promoted to Admiral of the Fleet of the Soviet Union, which is a 6-star rank. But remember that. He's been Rear Admiral, Vice Admiral, he's been Full Admiral, Admiral of the Fleet, and now he's Admiral of the Fleet of the Soviet Union. And there is a senior captain position which is technically acts as Commodore. Okay, the Soviet Union ranks are weird. He's been all these. In 1965, he is 55 years old. In 67, he is 57 years old. He's not a young man, but he's not an old man by any means either. He gets Hero of the Soviet Union again in December 1982. Again, they think he's going to be moving out. But he isn't. His key phrase is an interesting one to translate. I'm not going to try and speak the Russian. I'm not going to. But it can be translated as better is the enemy of good enough, or better is enemy of the good. I think it translates more likely in terminology, from what I've read and understand, as better is enemy of the good. But in context, is better is enemy of the good enough. And pretty much the point is, he wants the ships to be in service. There is a phrase that there is a belief that this hung on his wall in his office. He wanted the ships available in numbers in service. Now, there is a thing here to worth remembering. Gorshkov wanted good. That didn't mean he wanted stuff which was just in service. He didn't want trash, he wanted good. He wasn't requiring a 90% solution, but he was also not prepared to accept the 50% solution. He wanted a 75-80% solution he could produce in enough numbers that would be viable. And that is the interesting thing about him. That is his capability. That is what he brings to the table. He has serious skills and serious capabilities. And he has served for a long time. And during his Cold War service, while he's building up the fleet, whilst he's overseeing the construction and expansion of the Soviet Navy, whilst he's watching it grow and making and marshalling it through everything else, well, he's doing that. He is writing this book and publishing this book, which we're going to be talking to about after the shameless book plug. With that being said, it is the shameless book plug. And philosophy of the mops. Actually, no, I think because I'm now on network 6 rather than network 2, I think I've transferred over to the Starlink. So obviously, perhaps BT Internet went down. That could be it. It could be BT Internet's gone down. Because usually it's the BT that plays up. And I've set up the network switch so it'll favour the BT one. Because if it's working, the BT one is better. But the BT one occasionally breaks, and then the Starlink. But the trouble is, it's a network switch doing it, not a router. So it doesn't do load balancing automatically. It's a load of extra little bits added into it. It's a good network switch, trust me. It's a lot cheaper buying a network switch than a router. The router's going to be the best part of £300. The network switch was about 80. One I could justify quickly buying myself. One I needed to put money aside for. What's up, Big Fluff? What do you want? Do you want to go garden? I'm just going to put the pool in the garden. I'll be back in a second. Can poodle go garden? Poodle is just taking the longest pee ever known to mankind. Apologies, but this is why I've disappeared off. Thankfully, he didn't do his normal trick of, I'm going to gas Papa out and then demand to go to the loo. Cool. Now I'm gonna set it up so we have a load balancing router, and eventually we'll get the actual full fibre optic, because we are on the setup in this part of the country. We've got fibre to what's called the box, fibre to the cabinet, and then we've got copper from the cabinet to us. And the copper's an overhead wire, strung from the telephone poles. And, yeah, you get a little bit of wind, and the wire starts swaying, and the internet goes. And so then the Starlink jumps up and takes over. As in any well-ordered household, the needs of the floppy disk such as outweigh needs of the human. Yes, definitely. Now, Our earlier friend doesn't seem to have come back, I will say. So I'm presuming they were one of the troll fraternity. As they didn't give any information as to why they seemed to saying it was wrong in the chat, and they have disappeared. I do so love them. It's always the fun of internet history, in that you wouldn't do that to someone in person. You'd give an explanation. You wouldn't do this, but people behave like it online because they think it's anonymous. An emphasis, they think it's anonymous, until you do it to a site when it really isn't anonymous. Hello? No. You've had them. Do you want more food? Is that it? Is your food bowl empty? No, your food bowl is not empty. You've got plenty of food. You've got plenty of water. See, you've got all this food. And I've shown the people in the video as well, so they know you've got food as well. Yeah, it's an interesting career. How long has it been since he peed last? Literally, I put him out. The reason I was late starting this video was because he was out in the garden doing these sort of the things he's supposed to be doing. So, yeah, not that long. Not that long. Now, random for a shameless book plug, we're going to talk about a book here. Before we get into the rest, we're going to talk a bit about this, The Sea Powder State. It's worthwhile noting it has multiple chapters in it. And if I shrink this up a bit for me so I can use the screen more evenly. Now it starts off, it's got an introduction and a foreword to the English edition written by Gorshkov himself. And the foreword is this long. And in the recorded video, I'm not going to read it out, but in the live I am. On agreeing to publish this book in English, the author proceeded in the knowledge that this is the language of nations that for centuries have contributed to the development of naval science. Our knowledge and mastery of the world ocean, the progress of shipbuilding and navigation, and the discovery of new lands and sea routes to them all bear witness to this. These nations have left their mark too on the founding and development of military naval art. Their rich historical experience is conclusive evidence of the important role played by the seas and oceans in the progress of civilization. We Soviet sailors remember how, during the worst and most bloody war in world history, unleashed by the fascist Germany and militaristic Japan, you notice Italy always gets forgotten. What's that? Unleashed by fascist Germany and militaristic Japan. Where is Italy? The Soviet Union, the United States and Great Britain, or the Big Three as it then was, formed the base of the alliance against Nazi Germany. In this great battle which raged over all oceans and many seas, the seamen of the Allied countries, from both civil and military fleets, cooperated directly with each other in the decisions concerning their common objectives in the struggle against the enemy. The military alliance of our countries and of our armed forces and fleets, further strengthened by our common suffering in war, proved to be a key factor in our great victory, which saved mankind from the threat of fascist subjugation. Whilst themselves conducting difficult military operations against a powerful enemy, Soviet seamen followed with unwavering attention and concern the valiant struggle waged by their American and British allies in distant seas and oceans. There are occasions, especially north, when we fought together with our allies in a united battlefront, thus further strengthening the military solidarity and alliance between our countries and fleets. We learned to understand each other regardless of the language in which we spoke. It would only be fair to recall here how the Soviet Union took the brunt of military action and played a decisive role in bringing down the fascist coalition. This has been universally recognised and repeatedly acknowledged by the leaders of the West. However, although we consistently fulfilled our duty to alliance in the post-war years, we became the object of a protracted Cold War, which more than once threatened to turn into another world conflict using the latest weapons of mass destruction. See the point coming on? It is quite natural that the USSR, while guided by a desire for world peace in order to not to be taken unaware, was obliged to safeguard its own security, and thus the Soviet fleet was born. The vital need for defense measures is discussed in this book on the basis of the irrefutable facts of recent world events. Furthermore, the author gives a Soviet explanation for the sea power of the state, emphasizing its economic importance as well as its military aspects in the circumstances of today. Convinced that this economic factor will remain firm and constant, the author believes that the seas and oceans must above all serve to raise standards of living and to consolidate amicable relations between nations. The military aspect of sea power is of but transitory importance, which will continue to increase as world peace becomes more secure. This belongs, however, to the realm of the future. Thanks to the constant efforts on the part of the socialist countries and all other peace-loving forces, there has been a noticeable a detente in international relations. In the West, anti-Soviet propaganda is still rife. While the military budget continues to soar, new types of weapons are being invented and new military naval bases established, constituting firm evidence of armed strength. L.I. Brezhnev, General Secretary of the Central Committee of the CPSU, gave a clear and convincing reply to this show of force when he appeared on the French television on 5th October 1976. The Soviet Union has never threatened anyone and is not doing so now. It is ready to agree to mutual restriction on armed forces at any time. We are obliged, I repeat, obliged to protect our defense systems because we are faced with an unrestrained arms race. The author knows from personal experience, as do the Soviet people, what war means and fervently hopes that wisdom and good sense will prevail so that the immeasurable resources of the world ocean may be put to serve the cause of peace and prosperity. The world community, and indeed the reader of this book, could play an important part in the realization of these worthy aims. Now, the thing is, this book then opens up with a line about Marxism. We'll see that in 1 second. The point that has to be remembered about this book and this work is he has to couch everything in Soviet terms. He will couch everything in Soviet terms. That's the system he's come through, the system he's been developed in by. So he's going to use Soviet phraseology, and he's going to put forward the Soviet side of the argument. It's kind of like we often see in the world of people are kind of surprised when they see this in Western politics, but it's been part of politics for a long time. And basically, when you're with a communist regime or a fascist regime or anything which is an authoritarian political regime, they take this up the nth. There is one narrative. It is their narrative. They are always the good guys. Everyone else is bad. They always have good intentions. Everyone else is bad. Your opponent is only enlightened when it looks like they are going to agree with you. When they don't agree with you, it's because they are cretinous and evil. It is very simple. It is also very effective. You repeat something often enough, it becomes the narrative that it fixes in people's minds. Even if they don't agree with it, it's the narrative they're responding to. Their automatic response is about that narrative, not what the real narrative is. It's about that narrative. And it's worthwhile thinking this one through. Leave. So, it is very much an interesting work. But I haven't limited myself to just reading bits to you. I have got whole sections to read out here and for us to discuss. And the point is, I thought what we do is something which I usually do in my sort of standard lecturer technique system of how we approach book analysis. We'll have sections which are photocopied into packs just in case people haven't read the book. And we'll literally go, we will put this on screen, we will read this out as a group, and then we will discuss it. Okay? Thumping your shoe on the desk might not be always the best way to communicate, but it does drown out the other options, my friend Steve. It does. Now, here we have page 2. Page 2 from the very beginning. And it's worthwhile noting that page 2 comes from a chapter entitled Different Views on Sea Power of the State, and this is under the Oceans and the Sea Power of the State section. I'm going to read about 4 of the paragraphs from this, but please have a look at all. The material expression of that aspect of sea power of the state which is linked with the economy of the country is offered by the merchant, fishing and research fleets. The science of the ocean ensuring a study and exploitation of its riches, the various branches of industry extracting and processing the gifts of the ocean, and also staffs of scientists, designers, engineers and technicians, and the renowned army of seafarers with its diverse, complex and prestigious branches. At the same time, sea power naturally, together with other components, also includes the ability of our armed forces to protect the country from the threat of attack from the oceans. This aspect of sea power assumes greater importance the greater the military threat to our security. The material expression of this aspect of sea power, characterizing the real capacity of our country to ward off aggression from the oceans, is the constantly developing and increasingly sophisticated Soviet Navy called upon, in unison with our valiant armed forces, to guarantee the building of communism by decisively thwarting any attempts by aggressors to encroach on the great gains of the workers. This in no way means that the sea power of the country depends only on the real fighting strength of the Navy. It must be regarded primarily as the capacity of the state to place all the resources and possibilities offered by the ocean at the service of man and make full use of them to develop the country, the economy, the health of which finally determines all facets of life of our country, including its defense capability. In this context, the concept of sea power to a certain degree is identified with the concept of the economic power of the state. Accordingly, sea power may be regarded as a constituent part of economic power. Just as the latter determines military power, sea power, mediated by the economy of the state and exerting an influence on it, carries with it an economic and military principle. The circumstances which force us to include in the concept of sea power of the state prerequisites of the military character are due to factors at international level, notably the existence of imperialism, extending its rapacious ventures also to the hydrosphere. Therefore, as long as imperialism exists, the inclusion of military components in the concept of sea power of the state is an imperative necessity. In these conditions, the Navy must be regarded as one of the most important components of sea power, serving as a reliable guarantee of the security of our country and an important means of ensuring its interests at sea. Now, what's he saying here? What do we think? What is the subtext? Is this about the Soviet Union internationally, or is this domestic politics? Is this page about domestic politics, or is it about international relations? Is it speaking to the domestic audience or the foreign audience? What is it about? What do we think it's about? Domestic coming in from Steve. Both from Keeling. Politically acceptable way to push for a greater sea presence in traditional land-based power. It's about the funding battle. Mostly domestic from Malaga. Yeah. Yeah. It is. Now, this does have an international relations flavour. It's got a part in here which is warning everyone if they are abroad, if you're a foreign power looking at them, that they're mobilising everything and they're committed to the sea power. But by putting sea power as part of the economic strength of the nation, rather than purely as part of the military strength of the nation, he suddenly linked it to a higher priority, because it's only by having strong economics you can have strong military. Sea power is part of economics, so by having strong sea power, you help to have strong economics, which means you can support a strong military. He is making the higher function argument. He's arguing for funding. Yeah. There's lots of slogans to be included. There are lots of slogans, but it's got subtext for both groups. And this is the interesting thing when you read it. Now, I would also say, I think if you read through this book closely, and I speak this to the people who have copies of this book and people who get copies of this book, you will notice there's a tonality change, almost as if there's separate authors. Now, when you read the bit which you know is written indirectly by Gorshkov, because it has his name on it, and whilst that could be to an extent maybe the translation, but I don't think it is, because I've had this discussion with people who read and write Russian far better than I ever will. I read it okay when it comes to technical documents. I would not like to be speaking it too much, but they read it far more fluently than me. They have also agreed with my point. There are sections in here which we think are written by Gorshkov. There are sections in here which we are fairly certain are written by a historian, not Gorshkov, because of the way it's the syntax and the phraseology. This is structured like it's written by a naval officer. That's one of the reasons why I chose the chapters I have done to talk about, because there is a whole section called Pages in the Histories of the Navies, and that has whole sections in it, roughly 100 pages, which are definitely not the work of Gorshkov, in my feeling. I reckon he wrote the whole of chapter 1. I'm fairly certain he wrote sections in chapters 2 and 3. And he wrote the whole of chapter 4. I don't think he wrote the whole of it. There is too much phrasing differential going on. Too much phrasing differential going on. Post 99. The book is called Sea Power to State by Sergey Gorshkov. It is. It's a naval officer definitely who knows that the Navy is at the bottom of the funding totem pole and is making a case of it. It is a really interesting read. It's one of the few Soviet naval theorists who's published in English as well as in Russian. In fact, I think I seem to remember correctly, it's been published into about 40 different languages worldwide. And it is the basis. A lot of this is the basis of Chinese, Indian, and other academies and other groups teaching, naval academies where they're teaching, where they have literally started off with Gorshkov. Now, I'm not saying it's the only book in them. Please don't say that. I'm not saying it's the only book taught in them. It is not. And please note, whilst yes, the Chinese do, if you're looking at their analysis and how they've grown their navy, it does come straight out of the books at the pages of Gorshkov. It is straight out of the pages of Gorshkov, interpreted through a Chinese prism, and a Chinese world view. It is therefore not exactly the same as the Soviet Union. It isn't. It was never going to be. No, Rolly.
He didn't stop for night, sorry.
Yeah, I think he decided it was bedtime. I think that's literally it. No, I don't think he wrote 2 articles to different audiences and later combined them. I really don't. I think this book was written with a friend who was one of the academics in the university, Naval Maritime University. I think it's literally, how do I put this politely? I think Gorshkov he's basically in a scenario like Fisher and Corbett, where Fisher relies on Corbett providing the paper, but instead of Fisher whereas Fisher just stuck to newspaper pronouncements and making grand statements, Gorshkov is writing it down himself. And the reason Gorshkov is writing it down himself is in many ways he's doing this to provide for his future legacy. You have to think on it. When does this book come in? When does this book come out? It is published in 1976. 9 years before he goes off to the inspectorate. It is about him securing his legacy. And that's an interesting thing to think about in terms of Gorshkov securing his legacy. He's going to get roughly the equivalent of 2 full presidential terms to secure his legacy. And considering this probably took about 1.5 years to write, he's probably been focusing on securing his legacy for the previous for almost including his time in the inspectorate, for about 3 full terms. And that is Zebedee complaining about something. Give me a second, I will go check on what Zebedee's complaining on. They've not fed him again, they're just asking for trouble. Okay. In Zebedee's very real defense, someone had left a piece of sausage on a shelf above him which he couldn't reach. In Zebedee's very real defense, that is worthy of that noise. You leave sausage over the head of a corgi, he is allowed to wolf the house down because you are torturing him. I think he's now complaining he wants more sausage if you hear any more wolfing. But yes. Or he's hearing me and is agreeing with me. But yeah, he wrote many articles. He wrote a few other sources. There's a whole book in Russian which is about the publications of him. He was a prolific author. But, and I will say this, he's a prolific author who sometimes seems to be arguing against what he wants himself. Because there's the force structure he's designing, there's what he's arguing for, and what he then gets overruled and they get, which just happens to fit perfectly into the force structure he's designing. The man plays 3D chess the whole frigging time. 3D chess the whole frigging time. Now, let me turn to page 215, if I'm not mistaken. This comes with problems of the naval art. And this is a wonderful little section, which is from Fleet Against Shore section. And it's worthwhile to note that he does think about, again, as someone who spent his career doing what he did, he does think about amphibious operations a lot in this work. It's worthwhile reading to think about what they're going for. And again, I'm going for some of the middle paragraphs. As fleets developed, with formations of diverse forces, submarines and aircraft, and also the widening of arsenal of naval weapons, guns, torpedoes, and mines, the opposition of fleets at sea assumed ever new features. The gun duels of different ships were augmented by attacks of light, rapid, non-armoured torpedo forces, submarines, and aircraft. The operations of fleet against fleet therefore required great diversity in planning. Sea tactics began to look at the battles of diverse forces with their wide interaction in combination with major defence measures and other forms of maintenance. The appearance of rocket weapons accentuated this tendency, in that its latest expression is the fight against weapons which has assumed almost the same importance as destruction of ships, carriers of these weapons. In individual cases, it may become the sole means of ship defence. The evolution of forms of combat operations of the fleet helps to define the tendency towards a further complication of this process considered. The use of missiles with nuclear warheads, for example, generates major and complex problems associated with the appraisal of the balance of forces in the operation of fleet against fleet at sea and in protection of its forces. Now, the criterion of compatibility of the potential of fleets is the ratio of their overall combat power in different combinations of diverse forces and resources for different variants of a situation. An objective approach to the determination of fighting powers of the forces of the fleet helps to determine necessary and sufficient composition of forces in the most rational combination, which we call balanced. Analysis of sea engagements, battles, and operations suggest that despite very decisive operations in counterposing the force of the fleets, their results as a rule were no more than operational. Some exceptions are, for example, the results of the sea engagements of the 1898 Spanish-American War, the 1904-95 Russo-Japanese War, and also the attack of the Japanese fleet on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. At the same time, the totality of the importance of a fleet against an enemy fleet in war was often of strategic importance. Thus, for example, of undoubted strategic importance were the sea campaigns of the Russian fleet in the Mediterranean in the 18th to 19th centuries, Really? Yeah, egg in the cup, just a tad, my friend. Egg in the cup, just a tad. The struggle for Atlantic communications in the First and Second World Wars, and also the operation of Soviet fleets in the years of the Great Patriotic War in the sea theatres adjoining our territory. Should world imperialism launch a new world war, the prevention of nuclear strikes from sea would undoubtedly be of a strategic character. Okay. So here's the thing. You're going to hear him refer to balanced fleets quite a lot. Balanced fleets is something he's going to return to a lot. He is very much focused on balancing a fleet with the needs and priorities of the nation. It is something which he fundamentally believes in, he fundamentally argues for, and he will keep making the case of. But also, he's very clearly couching this in something which he can couch it in. The whole way through, he is arguing on 3 levels. 1, he is trying to provide an advice guide for naval officers coming through the Soviet Union on how they make the case for the Navy. And how they need to be thinking about making the case for the Navy. 2, he's arguing for the internal funding. Hence linking stuff to the strategic. And 3, he's making the case that the Soviet Union is scary to everyone else because he's pointing out nuclear weapons. And we all know that the Soviets are pretty much the most obsessed with fitting nukes onto almost everything. Now, the thing is, if we're talking about the Age of Sail battles he's talking about, and the Russian involvement in the Mediterranean, it is occasional and interesting. I certainly recognise it from the 19th century. And they do have an interesting part to play in the 18th century. They really don't get much into the Mediterranean. They really don't. Look, at one point there is while there's a war going on with France, the Russians very kindly send a squadron to support the British, dealing with the French and blockading the French as part of the defence of Britain. Does anyone want to know where the British base it? This squadron sent from the Baltic to assist the Royal Navy. Where do you think the British base it to ensure for it to be of assistance to the Royal Navy in operations? I will tell you this. It's definitely a frontline combat operations area. Alexandria, good idea, Paul, but no, not Alexandria. They sent it to assist Britain in dealing with the Channel threat of the French. Crimea? No. That'd be rude. Any up Dover? Nope. I will answer it, but I'm just going to say let a couple more guesses come in. A couple more guesses. Just see where people think they are. Baltica, Swaffham. Leslie Mitchell. Yeah, Leslie knew. The Isle of Man. Yeah. It was the Isle of Man. They deployed them to that well-known hotspot of French likely invasion and threat to the United Kingdom, the Isle of Man. No, Michael Cooch, that's another time. Another operation. In that scenario, I think the British actually sent the escort for the army. Denmark was a fun time. It was a fun time. The number of Russian troops who actually got involved in Denmark was not as many as were promised. But yes, they put them into the Isle of Man. But leaving that little bit of misremembrance of history, or rather some glorification of Russian history. You have to think that this is an analysis coming from, and it's one of the fun things is he does make sure to include his own operations from the Great Patriotic War. After all, I quote to you, and also the operation of the Soviet fleet in the years of Great Patriotic War in the sea theatres adjoining our territory. It is an interesting section because in many ways this is speaking mostly to what the fleet needs to be developed. It needs to be a balanced fleet, balanced weapon systems. Best is the enemy of good, or rather better is the enemy of good. You can see that coming through in this work. You can see the thought process coming through in this work. And there's a lot of study going on here of what fleets take part, you know. Traditional were the staging of sea landings of varying size and delivery of strikes of ship armament on targets located on the shore. The new modes of operations of fleet against the shore consisting of delivering of a strike of carrier aviation on ground targets and groupings of troops, and in destruction by nuclear missile strikes from submarines of land targets of great strategic and economic importance. Striking from the sea. He is very keen to make you understand that striking from the sea is nothing new. I know there is a lot of claims these days that it is something brand new and is something special, but it isn't. What's new is some of the ranges and the methodologies available, but it's nothing new to strike from the sea. And selection of what targets are worthy of ships striking from the sea at what ranges is very simple. There are metrics for that. The fact is, though, he is looking at warfare and is concluding that the future of warfare, you're not going to be fighting fleet against fleet. You're going to be fleet against shore. Both of you. You are dealing with a joined-up world where the shore, i.e. especially air bases ashore, are going to be a major part of fleet operations, and you have to work with them. Russian 20th century history must be a last minute. It's intriguing. Mostly it's people getting killed quickly. What is the interesting is that he's pointing out again that homogeneous forces are not something you can aim for. You know, he's always pointing out that balanced fleets are not necessarily going to be a homogeneous force, but a mixed force. And by that he means that the ideal of aiming for a fleet which is entirely made up of one type of ship and one group of ships is not going to work. You can't do that. You need a balanced force. Now the big issue he has with balancing is conflict management. It's the presence mission. One of the reasons why he establishes the fleets he does, one of the reasons why he does the things he does in terms of their working together and working around, is that he wants to have the ability to manage conflicts, manage risks in favor of the Soviet Union. You can't control the likelihood of war, but you can control the likelihood of that war overtaking your ability to interdict it and prevent it if it's not in your interests. Then we get on to this lovely page. And it is strike. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it is 225? Yes, it is. Page 224. With a bit on 225, but strike is worthwhile considering. The growth of the power of naval weapons at a particular stage of its development brought a quite new understanding of such a category as strike. Earlier, the concept of strike was accompanied by the modifying adjective definitions gun, torpedo, bomb, at one point ram. I would point out this was only in Russian naval tradition. In most of the English speaking, again in the francophone section, there was a bit like this as well. But in the English speaking world, basically, if you were fighting an enemy ship, you fought with them with everything you had. You didn't select. But, you know, hey-ho. That is, this category was considered only a tactical concept and only in individual cases. For example, the expression of strike from the sea, did it assume the importance of a concept of operational status? Now, the concept of strike has been extended to attaining of strategic goals. It is considered that strike is becoming the dominant form of use of forces, since it allows modern combat operations to realise to the full their potential from enormous distances and different directions, and thereby even attain such a strategic objective as devastation of the military economic potential of an enemy. In operational art, the strike is increasingly set itself as one of the basic methods of solving combat tasks. The strike in each operation is not only the totality of the specific combat actions wielded together by unity of purpose or tasks, it may also be independent and even a single act operation of a single weapons carrier or group of them. For example, a strike on a grouping of surface forces may be delivered by a group of ships armed with guided missiles. Naval aviation is equally able to discharge such a task. In the tactical link of the strike, unlike in the past when it was only one among elements of a battle and was regarded as a set of attacks held together by the unity of a tactical task, is increasingly becoming a tantamount to a battle. For example, by delivering a strike on a submarine of the enemy or the missiles launched by it, the combat task may be solved. A large surface ship may be destroyed by a strike by one submarine using long-range missiles. The further development of this tendency is promoted by the constant increase in the range and power of naval weapons, which makes it impossible, in certain conditions, to solve tactical tasks not by sustained and stubborn opposition, but by a unilateral single-act action against the enemy. Thus, strategic, operational, and tactical objectives can be reached by strikes. In individual cases, the strike delivered under the norms and rules of tactics, for example by missiles from a submarine on land targets, can immediately bring strategic results. This is an already new quality in a category as customary for assisted strike, which is undergoing changes in the process of development on a material base of armed struggle to see it as necessary in Naval. Now, this is one of those times when, if you consider the rest of the work, for some reason, someone is confusing knowledge with advancement. They're confusing technology with wisdom, but there's a reason for this. If you are trying to sell the procurement of new systems and new ships, and remember again, when this is published in 1976, it's published. Think about what he's trying to secure, what he's trying to get built at that point. He's got a lot of programs going. In 1976, he has a lot of programs going. He has the Kuznetsov, for starters. He has, well, when I say he has the Kuznetsov, I can just the details up. That is ordered in 1981. He is already working through what is going to come for it. For that is the Kiev class, which are built between 1970 and 1987. When this book is published, he has got Kiev commissioned. He's got Minsk launched. He's got Novorossiysk under construction. And he's trying to make the case for the Gorshkov, aka the Baikal. He's got cruisers coming through. And they are big ones. The Kirov class are, of course, laid down in 1974. Launched in 77, the Kirov as it is, and commissioned in 1980. The Frunz is laid down in 78. He has got all these vessels he is making the case for. These are strike assets. What's really worrying is when you consider that the various classes that they have. He also has the Slava class, of course, which Moskva, aka Slava, was sunk in 2022. She was laid down in 1976. Laid down in 76, launched in 79, commissioned in 82. Now, the thing is, Verdun, yes, you have asked the right question and the wrong question. You see, the Kirovs are capital assets. They are status asset ships. They're also, but what are they procured under? Can he get such ships procured purely as a status present ship? Can he purely get carriers procured as a status present ship? Or does he need to make the case for them? By pointing out the value of strike, and by being so explicit, and remember, this is not the first time he's mentioned strike. He's kept coming back to strike again and again and again, like a balanced fleet. Strike, balanced fleet, the linking of naval power to economic power. The whole way through, he's coming back. He keeps hammering these same points to make the case for the Navy. The Slavas, and to be honest, the Kirovs, the Kievs, and the Kuznetsovs are all these ships which, frankly, they are necessary to building up his navy. They really are. You know, it's well worth thinking that the Kuznetsov is laid down in April 1982 and is launched in December 85. Again, think about when Kuznetsov retires, or rather transfers to the inspectorate. It's December 85. After he has secured Kuznetsov construction. He's got her through to the launching stage. She's been launched. She should be commissioned now. She should be. They had a lot of power and a lot of capability. And it's... how do I put this? This is all about building up the Navy. It really is about building up the Navy and making the case for the Navy. Which brings us to fleets in local wars, which is always an interesting one to have. I think it's page 237 from memory. Yes, it is. And again, now, it's an interesting point if you start over on the previous page, on 236. To safeguard the interests of British imperialism, England also permanently keeps forces of her fleet in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. The true intention of these forces is exemplified by the aggression in 1956, when the strikes on Port Said were delivered by British and French fleets, totaling 185 ships. 6 aircraft carriers, 1 battleship, 3 cruisers, tens of destroyers and escort ships, and also marines and strategic aircraft. The British fleet had also earlier often played the role of an organizer of military conflicts in the Persian Gulf and other areas of the Middle East. Similar tasks are performed by the American Pacific Fleet, numbering hundreds of fighting ships, including a squadron of atomic-powered missile submarines and a considerable grouping of strike aircraft carriers. These forces are constantly present in different areas of the Pacific Ocean, in particular in the seas washing the countries of the Southeast Asia. In the last few years, the Indian Ocean has come into the sphere of the operations of this fleet. A squadron of US ships is permanently present, and new naval bases are being built. A favourite technique of the imperialists is also to conduct military political shows of strength by the fleet, to put pressure on democratic governments not to enjoy the patronage of the not to their liking, or to national liberation forces acting against unpopular regimes enjoying the patronage of the imperialists. Such displays as experience shows are usually run for a short time and often pass either into direct independent combat use of the forces or of the fleet or into operations to support land forces. The Imperialists must have mustered for local wars considerable force of the fleet, the specific composition of which has been determined by the prevailing situation, the course of events, and the character of conflict. For example, against small countries of Latin America, Panama, Dominican Republic, Guatemala Act, the US Navy has employed forces necessary only for disembarking units and divisions of the Marines and supporting their operations on shore. The Americans took a different line in the period of the Caribbean crisis directed against the Island of Freedom, aka Cuba. The USA used strike aircraft carriers, large formations of other surface ships, and large contingents of Marines. At the same time, vigorous preparations were made to use nuclear weapons and to stage a large seaborne landing on the Island of Freedom. Military political moves were made on a global scale to put pressure on other countries to make them refrain from supporting revolutionary Cuba. In all military conflicts, whatever their scale, the Imperialists seek to create and maintain overwhelming superiority in forces over their enemies. This also happened in 1953 War in Korea, during the events of Lebanon in 1958, and particularly in the 1961-73 War in Vietnam. Off the Vietnamese shores were permanently present the main forces of the US 7th Fleet. In the final stages of war, from the spring of 1972, combat operations were conducted here by 4 to 6 strike aircraft carriers, 60 to 65 large ships of other classes, and up to 180 patrol ships and vessels. Over 30 ships and as many as 390 patrol and landing ships of the US Allies engaged in combat operations. During the war in Vietnam, of the 17 strike aircraft carriers belonging to the US Navy, 15 took part in combat operations. Of 9 helicopter carriers, 6, and also 3/4 of the combat complement of guided missile ships, cruisers, frigates, and destroyers, 48 or 58, and the vast majority of destroyers, 163 of 179. Now, why is he bringing this up? Why is he bringing this up? Why is he pointing this all out? Why is he being quite so the way he is about it? Well, it's simple. Look at what he's saying, how capable these Allied forces are, how capable they are of affecting events, how capable they are of massing so much force. He's drumming home the numbers. He's drumming home the figures. He's drumming home what they're doing. He's drumming home the inevitability of their action. And he's saying, there's nothing we can do about it at the moment, because we don't have enough ships. But if you want to fund our economic power, if you want to grow our strength as a nation economically, and you fund our fleet, then we can interfere in these things on your behalf, maybe even prevent them. We can give you options. Hey, Wade. It's exactly that way, Verdun. It is. You are reading and hearing propaganda from Gorshkov. There is propaganda in this. Trust me, there is. But it's also, to an extent, and I know this is going to sound terrible, but there's also some propaganda in this. Because this is structured in a way that his audience is going to listen to, and that includes some very much American propaganda. And there's propaganda in this as well, because there's structures in here which is supposed to make the British audience listen to it. And we go through, well, this one definitely has. Naval operations of the war between Great Britain and the United States, 1812 to 1815. Yeah. If you're going to make the political classes wake up and pay attention and give you the money, you need to speak their language. I need to speak in a language that they are prepared to listen to. And that's what he's doing. He's speaking in a language they're prepared to listen to. And in many ways that they have to listen to. Exactly, he's speaking fluent Soviet. It's a case of how much butter you slap on the bread then. Yes, Steve. It is an interesting scenario. It's a very interesting scenario. And again, as I strongly emphasize in what I do, it doesn't hurt when books and sources have bias in them. What hurts is when you don't acknowledge or understand the bias. If you read this book and you accept everything it's saying on terms of Western navies, Soviet navies, and Russian history at purely face value, that's on you. If you do that with any book, that's on you. There are books which are going to be less the case than others. And books are going to be more the case. In my own book, there is a weakness in Tribals, Battles, and Darings. It doesn't have the Canadian or Australian ships in it. Why? Because I couldn't get to their primary sources. So, if you're reading that and you didn't read the bit at the front where it says quite clearly, I couldn't go to the primary sources due to COVID, so I apologise for this, it means their bits aren't included, you could walk away from that book with the opinion that it's only the British ones which matter, the British Royal Navy vessels which matter. And that's not the case. That's completely not the case. But every book has them, whether subconsciously or consciously, they have these things in them. Every source does. What matters is whether you acknowledge them and use them. And understand them. By the way, when did the Russian methodology of using the Black Sea as a dumping ground for incompetent, consequent, and connected officers begin, as well as the Baltic, Pacific, and Northern fleets in their respective ways? About the time under Gorshkov's tenure. It's during Gorshkov's tenure that this sort of happens. Madam Madison, this is why you seek multiple viewpoints on any topic. Exactly. It's exactly that. Now, there's a very interesting section called Fleets in Peace. And this is not quite the last section, but what we'll do is we'll go through this one, and we'll go through the next page, which are a part of this. So there are 2 more pages we're going to look at. And then it's going to be questions. And again, it'll be roughly 3 hours. And we'll see if the bot will work. So if the bot doesn't work, I'm hoping one of the very nice admins in the chat will act as bot. Well, that's the thing. This is the point. I always admit what my biases are because, and which people find, some people commenting on the channel find a bit weird. They go, "Oh, you're showing your bias and you're admitting it, and that's terrible. It shows you're corrupt or various things." And you get. Usually these are long comments which are full of swear words, so they never appear on the channel because of the fact that I keep my channel little cousin friendly in linguistics. Take care, my coach. And the point is, I don't see what the problem is. Yes, I try to minimize it, but I'm never going to completely erase my little biases and there's the fact is that I get very annoyed when I read books and they don't name the destroyers in them. There are books on this shelf which I've talked about, and I've said, look, It's a good book. I personally don't like this point because of this. They don't name the destroyers. They're just giving, oh, it's this name the cruisers, name the capital ships, and they just say, and 10 destroyers. And I find that annoying. And so I won't give this book as high a mark as someone else will because I find that annoying. That's my bias. But I admit it. Yeah. It's also, the fact that I admit my bias is also, to me, is kind of an advantage, because then when people complain that I'm, that my bias is have bias affecting somewhere else, I go, when I have bias affecting things, I acknowledge it. And I will often spot it out myself. If I'm not agreeing with you and and I don't think it's that biased, then that's probably because I haven't yet seen good enough information to make me change my mind. Now, in this one, this page is an absolute killer for the domestic political market. Policy as Lenin taught. Policy as Lenin taught. Oh, he's appearing to the sacred one. Is a concentrated expression of the economy. Policy as Lenin taught is a concentrated expression of the economy, the state of which primarily determines the power of such an important instrument of policy as are the armed forces of a nation. It is precisely in the state of armed forces of a given country that its economic power is reflected. Graphic confirmation of this, and a conventional indicator of the level of development of the economy of a country, may be the Navy. Yeah, he's linked, you fund the Navy because the Navy is part of the economy, and that's Lenin. This is pure domestic propaganda argument going on here. The modern fighting ship, wrote Engels, is not only the product of heavy industry, but also at the same time its model. A country with the best developed heavy industry will enjoy almost a monopoly of building such ships. Political strength at sea based on modern warships is not at all direct, but on the contrary, mediated by economic strength. These words were written at the very dawn of the development of the steam fleet. Now their significance is a much greater. To build a modern warship, a high level of development of all branches of industry and science of the country is needed. The building of an individual ship meeting modern requirements is possible only with the widest cooperation, only if each of the branches of industry connected with shipbuilders supplies products of the highest quality. As a rule, several hundred establishments takes part in the building of a fighting ship. The creation of a fleet as a whole, sufficient in complement to solve the task facing it with all the means of supply for its normal service, is possible only for a state with a powerful economy. The long time taken to develop the material technical resources of a fleet, the relatively short service life for ships, and the attendant danger of morale decay of the force of a fleet making special demands on science, which must lay down the guidelines for building a fleet for years and even decades ahead. The Navy, as a constituent part of the armed forces of the state, has a further distinctive feature, namely the ability to demonstrate graphically the real fighting power of one state in an international arena. This feature is usually utilized by the political leadership of the imperialist countries to frighten off potential adversaries. It should be noted that the arsenal of the means for such displays used by diplomacy of these countries is constantly expanding. As is known in the last few years, it has become common to hold displays of missile weapons, combat aviation, and various military equipment on an international scale, pursuing as well as commercial and other aims to surprise potential enemies with the perfection of skill equipment. Exert on them a demoralizing influence by the power of one's weapons, even in peacetime. Instill in them, in advance, the idea that their efforts to combat aggression are futile. This technique has often been employed throughout the history of military rivalry. True, such a propaganda technique far from always reaches its goals set, primarily because the means of war displayed impress the viewer merely as a potential force. The Navy is another matter. Ships appearing directly offshore represent a real threat of actions, the time and ways of realizing which are determined by their command. And if such a threat was quite great in the past, it has now considerably grown, since modern warships are carriers of nuclear missile weapons and aircraft, the zone of reach of which may extend to the whole territory of a state. A whole territory of a state. This is pure domestic propaganda. But it's also true. This is the beautiful thing. Propaganda, when it's true, is so much stronger. Because he says all the rest after the bits about Lenin are completely and utterly true. There is no argument here anyone can put against these things. This is by adding these two paragraphs at the top. These two paragraphs at the top. He's then able to make the case for all of this below. So this is his communist foundation. This is his foundation for Soviets listening. And then he's gone, look at this. Here's the reasoning. Here's what it builds up to. Fund the Navy. Fund it well. Fund it properly. You will have a strong economy and you will look like you have a strong economy. You will be strong on the world stage and you will look like you are strong on the world stage. You will have the ability to be able to influence things and you can go and influence things. Engels is a theoretical person, Steve Clarke. He is. But by linking Lenin with Engels, he's done something else. Engels is what? Think about Engels. Think about what he is. Engels was Karl Marx's lifelong friend. He was possibly the co-founder of Marxism. He's nothing to do in the Navy, but he is a higher political power again. This is for the country. Engels, bringing in Engels. That is for the academia. That is for the people who are the political commissars, the people who read their Engels, who study their Marx, who believe they are better communists than everyone else. And he knows where the power lies. In a one-party state, the one-party politicians of the political party are where the power lies. Engels is an interesting soul. So he combined both Lenin and Marx's co-author. He's capable here. He really has structured his stuff. And it works for him. It does work for him. He's making the case for funding the Navy, and he doesn't care how he does it. He's making the case for the role of the Navy, and he doesn't care how he does it. This book is entirely, as I said, it is legacy building. It is about building the argument for his legacy. And he knows very well it is going to go abroad. And it doesn't, I would say, with Engels, okay? Yes, he's not the strongest person to quote if you are talking to an audience from outside of the Soviet Union, outside of communist nations. But if you're inside the communist nations, he's a strong one to quote. It's what, in terms of argument, we might call an appeal to a higher power. Usually people appeal to God, but in a communist society, appealing to Marx, appealing to Lenin, appealing to Engels, just as good. Just as good. And finally, we have page 275. I'm just letting the chat catch up and make sure it's all together before we start on this one. Because I've seen a quote, the last message I had was from Steve Clarke, which was a couple of minutes ago. Yes, it is the interesting thing. If you do have Engels in there, it does mean, who can argue against this now? Because that's arguing against one of the Holy Trinity. Arguing against Engels means you are arguing against communism, means you are arguing against the state, means you are a traitor to the state. Exactly, Mother Medicine. Without a strong economy, you have no state. And without a strong navy, you can't have a strong economy, can you? So now we're going to talk about balancing the fleets, and it's worthwhile thinking that he finishes on this, because this is the last 9 pages. And balancing the fleets is what this is about. And I'm going to start from page 274 because I can, and it adds more to it all for you all. In the first post-war decade, the main task determining the building and development of the Navy continued to remain assistance of land forces in conducting operations in maritime directions and disrupting the near-lying sea communications of the enemy. To fulfill these tasks, the fleet had to possess a considerable number of surface ships of different classes, submarines, strong naval aviation, marines, and shore artillery. However, the severe wounds inflicted on our country by the war did not allow an immediate start to be made after capitulation of fascist Germany on building such a fleet. For a long time, it continued to remain imbalanced in relation to its tasks. The Navy did not have the necessary number of oceanic submarines, anti-submarines, and anti-mine ships. The fleet did not have landing ships. Naval aviation had a low radius of action, and anti-submarine aviation was absent. Fighters could cover ships at sea only in a narrow belt, lying next to the coast, and flak armor of ships remained weak. The auxiliary fleet was represented chiefly by the base craft of doubtful seaworthiness. Thus, the Navy continued to remain coastal, and hence at an operational strategic level in a war with a strong sea foe was a defensive factor. The main requirement for balancing the fleet could be clearly defined only in the second post-war decade, that is, after the restoration of industry and with the start of the technical revolution in military matters. The technical revolutionary military sphere, expanded economic potential, and the outstanding achievements of the Soviet science and technology. The introduction into the fleet of nuclear missile weapons, atomic power, and radioelectronic devices enabled the Central Committee of the CPSU and the Soviet government to set course for the building of a modern oceanic-going fleet, completely matching the defence requirements of our state in conditions of a growing threat to it from the oceans. In the briefest time, a qualitatively new fleet was built, capable of fulfilling tasks of a strategic character and waging a successful struggle with a powerful sea adversary. On the basis of thorough scientific research into the combat possibilities of the new naval forces and the resources of the fleet, analysis of the post-war developments of naval forces of the leading imperialist states, and experience in operational preparation of our foreign fleets, all the directions of naval science were determined, the operational tactical requirements of new forces of the fleet worked out, and a consistent theory of naval art created, opening the way to the planned development of these forces and their use in war. Operational tactical requirements were based on the thesis that a modern fleet, by virtue of the universality of the task facing it, must have diverse specialized forces. The optimal quantitative ratio of submarines, surface ships, aircraft units, marine, shore artillery, missile formations, and also auxiliary vessels and other means of supply must allow the formations and tactical groups created independently or in liaison with the formations of other branches of the armed forces to overcome the counteraction of the enemy and successfully execute the tasks falling on the fleet. Scientific investigation confirmed that such requirements may be met only by a balanced fleet, and we already have its basis. There you go. This whole book is about making the case for sea power, like all the others are. It's making the case for sea power from the Soviet perspective. Steve Clarke, he did say that quote about naval affairs. Like Marx, he wrote about many things.
You're going to enjoy your time here, and I hope you're going to have a lot of fun. Please keep following, and please invite others to subscribe to this.
He wrote about many, many things. Hello, Slayerdarth. Thanks you for following the Twitch channel. That's the thing. Engels wrote about many things. In the nicest way, there are 4 people who you can usually count for a quote on any subject. Churchill, who talked about many things. Marx and Engels, usually fairly good. Anyone guess who the 4th person is you can usually rely on for a quote on pretty much anything. You can spin to pretty much anything. Anyone? Who the 4th person is who you can quote on pretty much any topic because they wrote so much? While you're all thinking about that, I'm going to work through some of the questions in here. Or I said Churchill lines. Not Hitler. Roosevelt. Which Roosevelt, Steve Clarke? Teddy. Okay. Yeah, Teddy. He spoke about all sorts of things. He produced so many quotes. So many quotes. There are others. There's basically a set of 4 at the top that you can pretty much always find something about anything. Pretty much any topic you can imagine, you can find a quote which is applicable. And then there is about a group of about 40 others below them who you can find quotes on. And I would say there is a bit of a linguistics bias going on there because all 4 of them wrote stuff occasionally, quite often wrote stuff which was immediately translated into English or even published in English. But also there is the fact that, how do I put this? To make a good quote, it has to have both enough tangential link, but also be vague enough to work. And the thing is, English is quite a good language for that, because it tends to be quite a specific language. Whereas, and this is going to get me into trouble, quite a lot of, especially the Oriental languages, have beautiful imagery, but they don't necessarily have that tangential link included in a quote. I say this as someone who has spent many years searching through quotes from Mao Zedong and a few others trying to hunt down quotes on subjects on such as naval power and not finding enough. Anyway, right, I'm going to, before we start the questions, I'm going to try and get the bot to work. Let's see if we can get the bot to work, shall we? I only bring up your eye if I want to torment Leslie. As a rule. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to reload for a 4th time now in a row, Steambot, and see if I can get it to work. So, I'm not sure who's going to be very helpful and act as the powder monkey today. Oh, by the way, it seems some people didn't realise... But there is a history discussion section, just a pure discussion section. There's quite a few different historical discussion sections in the chat, in the thing. There were always 2 discussions channel, but one always seemed to get all the discussions, and one seemed to get ignored and disappeared most of the time. So there is the discussions on the bilge pumps in the modern stuff in the Discord channel, and there's the discussions on the naval history of Dr. Alex. Now, bilge pumps will return, so this is why I've kept the bilge pump section going in the chat and the Discord, because it will return. And then we have the interesting history section, which is for what ifs and those sort of things. And we have a few things going on in there. And as always, I will be in Discord after this. After a bit, I'll be in Discord. Let's see. Steve has jumped in. So Steve is playing Powder Monkey today. Steve Clarke, Q&A. Right, so Steve is, I think, are you on Twitch and YouTube, or YouTube? Which one are you on? And you're starting with a question. That's good. That's fine, Steve. If you're going to do the work, you're checking for the questions. Then you can start. That seems fair. Let's make sure questions are open. Sign up. And at Steve Clarke, aim for Steve Clarke. If you see him, he'll be popping around. Just message him. He'll pick up the questions and put them in the chat. The bot's not working. You don't mind doing Twitch questions, Lions. That's very kind of you. I'm not sure if you can add them into the Warship's Q&A stuff. There do seem to be some admins around there. Possibly gonna, if the bot's gonna keep not working, we're probably gonna have to grow the Masters at Arms on the admin team, because they keep doing all this stuff, and it's a lot of work. Paul is running the is going to be taking the questions from Twitch. Okay, thank you. But yeah, it does look like something. If I can't keep having Paul and Steve keep doing this all on their own. There's a lot of questions coming in. So Steve, I have a question. If Gorshkov had more budget at the beginning of the 1970s, what does he build more of to reach his aims? Oh, he builds more carriers and large cruisers. He's going for a fleet which he can cause, and probably submarines as well, because that's the thing he was really interested in. He's trying to build a balanced fleet, so he builds more pretty much of everything. But if he has extra money, he's going to be building more of the centerpiece of ships, so he has more flexibility in their deployment. He's an interesting one, is Gorshkov. Balanced fleet is his mantra. Balanced fleet. He doesn't agree with having a focused fleet. That's what he describes as. So, when people try and say that the Soviet fleet was all submarines, you should remember that no, it's heavily submarine, but it's always built as a balanced fleet, and Gorshkov is always working on building up the case for the surface ships. And he makes the case and he wins the argument. It takes him a long time to get there. The Soviet system has not moved quickly, but he gets there. Thanks, Lions. Thank you, everyone. Seneca, question: what is your opinion on AI in naval history? Both regular machine learning and generative AI. It's an interesting thing. Okay, there's been a lot of AI recently talk about how it's going to be used to fuse the gaps in history, and to an extent, I don't necessarily object to that. It's kind of what historians do anyway. We sometimes have to make judgment calls. But I would say the problem is going to be is that there's a certain perspective which is going to say, well, if it's an AI, if it's a machine doing it, it must be right. And the thing is, its opinion is just as valuable as any historian's opinion, in my mind, on the subject. It's making a leap based on its understanding of the evidence. And the thing is, the problem with AI it's going to have is it's going to always be a product of its programmers. And this is where I start to be interested. I don't think there's a lot of programmers involved in AI programming who are actually historians first. So it's programmed by people who think in terms of modern engineering and science and maths. And one of the things a historian does is they learn to put themselves in the mind of the earlier generations. Now, there is an interesting chance here. Because there's a point of, what do you get when you can get an AI programmed by an AI? And an AI programming an AI would probably think of that. But the thing is, again, at that level, do we lose control of the AI? This is all interesting stuff. But it's another tool of analysis. I reserve the right to disagree. I reserve the right to disagree with my colleagues. Tonight's video is, there is a lot of, you can find a lot of books out there which will basically spend their entire time going, oh no, Gorshkov really wasn't in charge, it was this person who lasted for like 5 minutes. And I go, well, because this person was more important, they got a higher status, they got this position, and they had this, and they had this laud, this public lauding, etc. And you sit there and go, yeah, they were there for 5 minutes. Who wrote the specifications before they got in there, and who kept them going after they left? So, better mark these questions as done. Carl Gersberg, can we have a comparison about the environmental awareness of Gorshkov? Now not mentioned, and the Western contemporaries. Oh, none of them had any environmental awareness. Please note, all of them are about exploiting the sea. There is not a single one which has any environmental awareness at this point. Environmental awareness is something which is coming in the 1980s, realistically, at the level of which we're talking about. They are all about exploiting the sea. They are all about exploiting it. Verdun. If the carriers and cruisers are built, what are the US responses to the extra cruisers, given just 4 hours wouldn't be enough? They probably have to build the strike cruisers. That is the legitimate reason why the USN was considering the strike cruiser program and talking about them, was because of the large Soviet cruiser programs. If they're building more, then the strike cruisers get built. That's it. That's the American response. They don't just rebrand the Taikos from destroyer leaders to cruisers, they actually build the strike cruisers, the proper cruisers, and that has an impact. Honestly, that has an impact. If they're building something the size of the strike cruisers earlier on, that has an impact. AI naval warfare is going to be interesting again. I think I've already said that I'm fairly certain the next generation of Flower-class corvettes or their equivalent will be uncrewed or optionally crewed assets. I've said that several times. I think you will get loyal kayaks, wingmen, whatever you want to call them, fairly soon. I don't think they will necessarily be true AI, though. And I have a reason for this. Because, and this is going to sound from, see, in wartime, it's fine. You can get away with these things, like Ukraine's doing with some of the stuff they're doing, because you can go, it's during war, and war can be excuse for a lot of issues. In peacetime, if you're sailing around the world and you've got a ship with you as escort and it's not under your control and it's not crewed and something happens, who gets the blame? Who gets the blame? So I think they will be optionally crewed and they will be basically under the tasking control of whichever ship they're with. So they won't be AI acting independently. They will be basically ships which can do, there'll be vessels which can do a modicum of management of their sea state, etc., and things in operation, and keep station with an allied ship. But they're basically floating extra missile and gun batteries and extra sensor platforms. Senator Canary, if Gorshkov, Bowman Boy, if Gorshkov was alive today, what does he do? If Gorshkov was alive today, somehow, and he'd be very, very old, or if he was suddenly brought back to today, he's probably bemoaning the state of the Navy, and how the frigate did they muck it up so. And Lord help anyone who, let's put it this way, some of those people, those accidents which happened to people who were causing him trouble, might happen to a lot of people who were involved in the Moscow events. Molly Madsen, given how many areas the Soviets needed to be able to deploy naval assets, how would they square the circle of balanced fleet versus finite assets? Usually that is why you have the large number of small ships the Soviets build. That is what the large number of smaller ships are for. The Krivaks and the vessels below them, the Grishas, they're built in large numbers for that reason, because you need presence. And that's always balanced. But the thing is, building more of those, especially when you're already building the number you are, doesn't take much money. So if you have extra money, it's very easy to build more of those without actually spending a lot of on them. Because they're already high volume units in naval terms. And usually as you produce more of it, well, A, the research costs get spread over more units, but also the cost of building the unit goes down. Because you're not paying for training, you're not paying for new tooling, you are just paying for the supplies. So yeah, their main problem would have been crewing them. But again, the thing is, Gorshkov always found a way. He found a way. Paul Mamus, is there a Western equivalent to Gorshkov, and if so, who is it? James Cable. James Cable. Writes Gunboat Diplomacy. I have multiple of his books around here. I can't see gunboat diplomacy itself, but I did bring him out earlier. I brought one of his books, Britain's Naval Future, out earlier. There you go. That was Britain's Naval Future. But he's got a book called Gunboat Diplomacy. There's also Roosevelt, to an extent, but this was Henry Hendricks' Theodore Roosevelt's Naval Diplomacy. What he gets up to in that, which is always a good one to read. There's also, if you want to read it, that's a good one. They are good books. Mark Harkness, if Stalin manages to get 2 to 3 of his battleships and maybe a couple of Stalingrads built before his death, how does it suggest Gorshkov's thinking? It gives him more assets to play with. It gives him more assets. Honestly, if he's got those in his core force as projection assets, he probably gets carriers earlier because he's already got a significant surface force to build from. Modern medicine, in essence, a return to Juno Cole thinking. Not really, no. The numbers thing, the small ships, etc., to fill in. Don't think it was Juno Cole, or think of it as like Fisher, who used the idea of flotillas of destroyers and submarines to defend the UK, etc., while you had a big battle fleet. The Juno Cole is a fundamentally unbalanced doctrine because you get rid of the capital ships. But you having small flotillas of ships to spread out your presence, etc., around the world, that's perfectly balanced if done within the context of your larger capital assets and your medium-sized ships. There is always a disconnect between available assets and needed assets. There's always a disconnect. This is one of the reasons. This is the entire that is basically the issues behind the my presentation, my thing which I'm going to be doing, my paper which I'm going to be doing for the Lawson. So it's about the fact of how you meet those needs, how you address those needs, and how you structure your fleet. But yeah, if Gorshkov has those big assets to play with, he's going to be using them. He is going to be using them, and he's going to be building them. Oh, this is, I'm guessing, is from Steve. If the US builds strike cruisers in the late 70s, early 80s, what do the Soviets create in response? They've already got the response. They've got the Kirovs, they're building Kuznetsovs, they're building the Slavas. They've got their response to them, and they've got their big submarines, so they're probably going to keep on with those. And I would say there's a discussion going on in the chat about AI. AI is one of the most overused buzzwords we have going on. There are all sorts of things which are talked about in terms of AI, and it's led rise to the phrase which I hate the most, true AI. And the reason you've got true AI appeared is because so many people are passing off what are very simple large language models, logarithms, very basic systems in some regards as AI. Because AI gets funding, large language model doesn't. Carl Gosberg. If more Kirovs come, would the US then adopt a bigger, more capable anti-ship missile besides a Harpoon? Not realistically, because the US are looking more at Harpoon as death by 1,000 cuts. Interesting enough, you might see adoption of bigger torpedoes. But basically their view is that they want to plunge as many Harpoon as possible. What you might see is the standard load of Harpoon and strike missiles up. So the standard might be for ships to carry 16 rather than 8. In fact, it might even go more. It would be the interesting thing would be, and I think the highest possibility of this would be you would get, oh, our standard is to carry 16 harpoons, not 8. And I wondered where the policy of carrying 8 has come from. It sounds like a nice number, but to me it always seems rather short. It's like, if you think about it for Type 23s and etc., you're carrying 8 of these missiles. Especially for the Royal Navy and other navies which don't have the carrier force that the US Navy has with their carrier strike range, especially of the pre-end of the Cold War carrier air group. They could possibly justify carrying just 8, but for other navies that was never really an option. They always need to carry more. One man said, "Oh, I believe I found a weak point in my thinking. Gorshkov provided a map to get the horses water, but getting them to drink was another matter. Yes, he could only beat them over the head so many times before they might try and get rid of him, and then they'd be completely lost. So basically, he tries to get them to drink enough water to get enough position they're okay." Oh, it does. It does. Matthew Killing. It does feel like a whole load of holdover from the old torpedo loads of destroyers. But in the nicest way, you had a lot more destroyers than you have modern ships, and they would attack in packs of destroyers, not one ship firing its missiles. But yeah. So basically, the American plan, if they have more Kirovs, is to carry more missiles. Yes, fleet. Yes, Steve. I mean, sorry. It does cut. A block of 4 does mean you have 4 to each beam. Yes, but why just settle for 8? It doesn't take up much space. You could add on. Another 8 quite easily. It would actually be sensible too. Paul Amos, how much did the Soviets spend on a navy when compared to the USN? Now here's the problem. We have a similar issue with trying to analyze the Chinese budget. And we have a similar issue with trying to we have, believe it or not too dissimilar issue between trying to understand the UK budget. The Ministry of Defence spending in the UK includes all sorts of things, including the Commonwealth War Graves and various other things added into its spending amounts to make up its percentages according to NATO. Now, for some reason, there are people who believe that even though most Western nations have all sorts of things added in and subtracted out from their defence spending, and to try and make the figures add up the way they want to, that the Soviet Union or China are not equally as capable of adjusting the funds. Basically, to try and figure out how much a percentage they're spending on their navy, it's a lot of work. But honestly, I would say they're not probably spending as much on their navy as part of their funding as the as the Americans are spending on the US Navy. Because they can't. Because they have to prioritize. Well, they always the order of spending priority always goes the strategic forces, which is why he keeps linking the Navy to the strategic forces again. The Army, the Air Force, the Navy. And he's trying to link the Navy to the economy and strategic forces to try and bump it up the spending, or at least strengthen its position in spending debates. John Carlton, somebody probably performed the calculation 8 was the maximum number of missiles that the frigate could launch before getting hit itself. I don't think that's true. It would sound logical, and it would be nice. If I could believe they did, I would be so happy with that response, John Carlton. I'd be so happy with that situation. But I don't think that. I think honestly, it's the maximum. It's the minimum number they felt they could get away with politically, from an economic, political perspective. The minimum they could buy, and it would look okay. Because of the torpedo reasoning. They carry 8 anti-ship missiles, like we used to carry 8 torpedoes. It fits. it fits. Not mentioning the fact that we used to carry reloads for the torpedoes, and by the end we were carrying 10 torpedoes, usually, in 2 quintuple mounts, and these sort of things. Yeah, it's fun. Steve, are the Chinese the modern followers of Gorshkov? As I said at the beginning, they have a very Chinese interpretation of Gorshkov, but Gorshkov is there in in a lot of their thinking. But that makes sense, because Gorshkov is the guy who explained sea power to communism. And whilst the Chinese state is, I'm not even if I'd call it Maoist anymore. I'd say it's a version of Maoism. It is interesting. It is interesting. Then there's the issue of state-owned defense industry versus military-industrial complex. Oh yeah, that's oh, there's so much fun when it comes to the Chinese and working everything out. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna have to put this back on. You know you're getting older when you hurt yourself doing exercise. I had to take last week off training because I hurt my foot, and this week I'm back to training, but I'm not dieting this week. I'm just trying to build myself up again, and then I'll go back to dieting again. Luckily I didn't put on much more weight. It's the way history goes. So, last questions. And then I'm going to disappear off for a bit, check on the dogs, check on the family, and then I'll be back on Discord. Thomas Gore, if you can only have one, what's the best Supreme song? No idea. Don't know which songs are Supreme songs. Sorry. I'm terrible. Favorite song to play on the trombone is Tuxedo Junction, because it has a great trombone solo in it. Also fairly good at Stand By Me on the trombone, or at least I was years ago when I was first trombone in a big band. Maoism is interesting. It is. See what else have we got coming up. Next week we have the Battle of Gravelines, followed by Jeffrey Hornby. Hornby, I'm recording tomorrow. Gravelines is finally finished. I'm finally happy with Gravelines. It's going to be uploaded tonight. I think my mum's got quite a collection of Supremes. At the moment, I will say this, my mum is currently incensed by the Iron Mouse situation and is currently railing against that, but we'll leave that to one side. The idea of taking money from charity, the charity really, really annoys her. Really, really annoys her. Right then, with that saying, I'm going to do this off and say thank you very much, everyone, for your being here this evening. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed it all. You can tell when I wrote this, but you can tell when I wrote this presentation, or rather started writing it, by just how... The thing is, I update these things as I go throughout the year, and but once I've started something, I leave it so I sort of know when... I was writing this back in end of May, beginning of June. What is the airspeed of an unladen swallow? Painful when it hits your head, I'm told, by my sister, who has been hit on the head by a swallow, a seagull, which caused me to accuse her of having squorcosis because it cut her lip, and I think a robin as well. She puts out more. She's the one who fills up all the bird feeders in the back garden, everything all the time, and always has for years. And yet birds seem to have it in for her. I'm not sure why. I think the shoujo has already ended. I seem to know, seem to be hearing those sorts of things. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and just thank you for being here. Hope you found it interesting. Doodles.